History teaches us something unsettling. The most devastating collapses never arrive with sirens or announcements. They arrive quietly, silently. And by the time the crowd realizes what is happening, the exits are already locked. After Japan shook the bond market, the world assumed the danger had passed. It hadn't. It had merely shifted location. While investors were distracted by Tokyo, a far colder calculation was taking place deep in the heart of Europe, not in Berlin, not in Paris, but in the country the world trusts the most with its money, Switzerland. For generations, Switzerland has sold one promise above all others: absolute safety, neutrality, stability, a place where wealth survives, wars, collapses, and revolutions. But now an uncomfortable question is spreading through global finance. Does Switzerland still trust the system it helped build? The Swiss National Bank holds one of the largest reserve portfolios on earth, trillions in foreign assets, massive gold holdings, and deep exposure to the US dollar system. But here's the detail most people miss. Much of that gold is not stored in Switzerland. It sits abroad, in New York, in London, in Frankfurt. For decades, this made sense. Those cities were considered untouchable. Their vaults were assumed to be sacred ground. Assumed. In late 2024, an internal review inside the Swiss National Bank triggered a quiet alarm. Not a public report, not a press release, just a simple internal request. When was the last full physical verification of our foreign-held gold? The answer was deeply unsettling. There hadn't been one. For years, Switzerland, like many nations, had relied on written assurances, statements, ledgers, trust. When Swiss officials requested physical access to inspect and audit a portion of their metal, the response they received was polite and troubling. Yes, they were told, but not immediately. There are logistical complications. It will take time. How much time? 5 to 6 years. Let's stop right there. We are not talking about moving a city. We are talking about a few hundred tons of gold, an amount that could be transported by a handful of cargo flights, or a single secured shipping operation. So why half a decade? Because history has taught us something crucial. When a bank needs time, it usually isn't preparing trucks. It's searching for inventory. That's when the real fear set in. If that gold had been leased, if it had been rehypothecated, if it had been pledged multiple times across paper contracts, then it wasn't truly there. It existed only as a claim, and claims collapse under stress. By mid-2025, Switzerland made a decision, but not loudly. There were no headlines, no dramatic speeches. Instead, the Swiss National Bank quietly adjusted its balance sheet. Dollar exposure began to shrink. Foreign bond holdings were reduced. And something else increased steadily and deliberately: domestic physical storage, gold brought home. Assets moved inside Swiss borders, counterparty risk eliminated. This was not routine portfolio management. It was preparation. Because the world is now trapped inside a dangerous illusion, a system where every real asset supports dozens, sometimes hundreds of paper promises. That system functions only as long as no one asks for delivery. Japan asked, Germany asked. Now Switzerland is locking its doors. This is not about gold prices. It is about trust. When trust breaks, paper becomes paper, and when too many players run for the exits at once, there are not enough assets to satisfy them. The question is no longer if the system cracks. The question is who exits first. Because when the final audit begins, and the music stops, only those holding physical assets will still have a seat. Nothing in this video is financial advice. We are not telling you what to buy or sell. We are simply observing the behavior of the most cautious institutions on earth. And history is very clear about one thing. When the most conservative nations start pulling assets out of the system, they are not being paranoid. They are being early. So here is the final question, the only one that truly matters. If you walked into your bank tomorrow and asked for your life savings, and they told you to come back in 2031, would you still believe the vault was full, or would you finally realize, far too late, that it had been empty for years? Because after Switzerland quietly moved its assets home, something strange began happening across the global financial system. Not crashes, not headlines, not panic. Something worse: delays. In early 2025, bullion dealers around the world began reporting the same issue. Orders were being accepted, payments were clearing, but deliveries were slowing down. Weeks turned into months, premiums quietly exploded, and the phrase no one wanted to hear started appearing in contracts. Cash settlement preferred. That phrase is financial code for one thing only: the metal is unavailable. At first, banks blamed logistics, then insurance, then temporary supply chain disruptions. But supply chains don't disappear simultaneously in London, New York, Zurich, and Singapore. Vaults do. Behind closed doors, a silent freeze was spreading through the gold market. Large institutional players were being discouraged, politely, from taking delivery. If you insisted, fees increased. Waiting periods extended. Paper alternatives were strongly recommended. The system was doing everything it could to prevent one outcome: physical withdrawal at scale. Because once enough metal leaves the vaults, the illusion collapses. This is where the real problem begins. The modern financial system is built on velocity, not possession. Assets move digitally, claims change hands instantly, and everything works until someone demands the underlying reality. Gold breaks that system. Gold doesn't move at the speed of fiber optics. It moves at the speed of trucks, planes, and armed guards. And more importantly, gold cannot be printed. By mid-2025, internal memos from several European banks began circulating among regulators. They all contained the same concern: delivery requests are accelerating. Central banks weren't trading anymore. They were extracting. Every ton removed forced the system to rebalance. Every bar shipped destroyed leverage. Every vault emptied weakened the paper market that relied on it. This created a dangerous feedback loop. As physical gold left the system, paper claims became riskier. As paper claims became riskier, more players demanded delivery, and the more delivery was demanded, the less gold remained to deliver. This is how runs begin, not with fear but with math. At the same time, something else began to crack. The bond market. Japan's treasury liquidation didn't stop. It accelerated. Other countries followed quietly. No press releases, no announcements. They simply stopped buying. The Federal Reserve responded the only way it could: liquidity, balance sheet expansion, emergency facilities, quiet monetization. More dollars entered the system in months than had been created in entire decades. On paper, everything looked stable. In reality, purchasing power was bleeding out. Foreign central banks saw the pattern immediately. Holding US debt no longer meant safety. It meant exposure. Exposure to inflation. Exposure to political paralysis. Exposure to a system that now required constant intervention just to remain standing. So they did what rational actors always do when confidence disappears. They reduced risk. They sold paper. They accumulated hard assets. They shortened timelines. And they stopped trusting promises. This is the moment the world crossed an invisible line. For decades, the dollar was not backed by gold. It was backed by belief. Belief that claims would be honored. Belief that liquidity would always exist. Belief that counterparties would remain solvent. That belief is now eroding, slowly, then suddenly. The most dangerous phase of a collapse is not the panic. It's the calm before it. The phase where institutions move silently, while the public is distracted by noise. By the time headlines appear, the positioning is already done. Gold doesn't spike first. Delivery fails first. Currencies don't collapse first. Confidence drains first, and when the final repricing happens, it happens violently. Not because gold becomes more valuable, but because paper becomes less real. This is why nations are acting now. Not out of fear, out of arithmetic. Because once the system openly admits it cannot deliver, the game is over, and the only question left will be, who prepared early, and who trusted too long? This is the moment the system fears the most. Not a crash, not a headline, not even panic. Decoupling, because when decoupling begins, prices stop meaning what people think they mean. For decades, the world has believed one comforting lie, that the price of gold on a screen reflects reality. It doesn't. It reflects confidence. The number you see, whether it's $2,000, $4,000, or $5,000 an ounce, is not the price of gold. It is the price of paper claims on gold. A price discovered in markets where delivery is optional, settlement is flexible, and promises vastly outnumber physical supply. But decoupling changes everything. Decoupling occurs when paper gold and physical gold stop being interchangeable, when the contract says one thing and reality says another. And by late 2025, the early symptoms were unmistakable. Dealers stopped quoting firm prices. Premiums became volatile. Inventory vanished overnight. You could still buy gold on paper, but try to take delivery. Suddenly there were conditions, delays, minimum quantities, and increasingly aggressive suggestions to accept cash instead. That's when insiders knew the paper market was breaking away from physical reality. Here's the mechanism no one explains on television. The global gold market is leveraged beyond comprehension. For every single ounce of real deliverable gold, there exist dozens, sometimes hundreds of claims, futures, options, swaps, ETFs, unallocated accounts, all perfectly legal, all perfectly fragile. As long as only a small fraction of participants demand delivery, the system survives. But when confidence erodes, behavior changes. And behavior, not policy, is what collapses systems. Once central banks began withdrawing metal, private institutions followed. Once private institutions moved, high net worth individuals noticed. And once individuals notice, panic becomes unavoidable, because gold does not fail gradually. It disappears suddenly. The moment physical supply can no longer satisfy contractual demand, the market faces a choice: default or reprice. Default destroys credibility overnight. Repricing destroys currencies slowly, but permanently. History tells us which option governments choose. They reprice, not by announcing it, but by letting the physical market slip out of reach. This is where the screen price becomes theater. The number still updates, charts still move, analysts still argue over resistance levels, but try to buy real metal at that price. You can't. The true price reveals itself only when delivery is required, and that price is not incremental, it is exponential. Because repricing isn't about gold becoming more valuable, it's about currency becoming less trusted. Every dollar, euro, or yen in circulation competes for a shrinking pool of real assets. When that competition becomes obvious, value resets violently. This is the endgame Germany understood, the calculation Switzerland completed, the warning Japan accidentally triggered. Gold is not rising, fiat is falling, and once the market internalizes that truth, the old pricing model cannot survive. This is why decoupling is irreversible. Once participants learn that paper claims are conditional, they never unlearn it. Once trust breaks, it never fully returns. From that point forward, gold trades in two markets: the visible one, where prices are quoted, and the real one, where assets are transferred quietly, at premiums no screen will ever show. Governments will call it volatility. Central banks will call it transition. Media will call it speculation. But history will call it something else. A reset, not announced, not voted on, but enforced by math. This is how monetary eras end, not with collapse, but with replacement. Paper systems don't die. They are abandoned, and when enough players leave, the structure remains standing, but hollow. So the final question isn't whether decoupling will happen. It's already happening. The only question left is, when the paper price finally disconnects from reality, will you still be holding promises, or will you already be standing outside the system that made them? Because when the screen price stops mattering, only one rule remains: what you can hold
you control.